Today I'm going to be doing a mix using only Reaper plugins. So today I'm participating in the Reaper contest from the forum. Usually the rules are that you have to use only Reaper plugins, and because this is a longer video, I will do an ad read at the beginning. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform with over 29,000 classes on art, design, freelancing, pretty much any topic you can find classes on. The videos are great quality and their site is really focused on helping you learn. Right now I'm really interested in stop motion video, and I'll be using Skillshare to learn more about that. I can see here that they have a lot of different courses on that topic already, and so many other filmmaking topics. I've been really enjoying what I've been learning about on Skillshare. There's so much good stuff on there, and it's now one of my first places I look when I want to learn something new. If you want to use Skillshare for 2 months for free, you can use the link in the description. After that, it's only $10 a month if you want to continue your membership. And if you've signed up with Skillshare and enjoyed your 2 free months, let me know in the comments what kind of videos you've been watching, if there's a particular favorite course. Okay, so this is the song that I'm working on. My Father Never Loved Me by Trafficker, and the BPM is 98. Comes from the Cambridge MT site. I wish I could say I've never heard it before, but I've already recorded for an hour. But when I went for a break, I realized that the sound of the mix was not captured. So starting over. I'm going to take all my audio files, which are FLAC files. If you don't know, FLAC is a losslessly compressed version of WAV. You can go to and from FLAC and WAV without any audio quality loss. Reaper will just play this back as if it was WAV. It decodes it in real time. You will probably have a bit higher CPU because of it, but they use FLAC just to distribute this easily. All right, so separate tracks. So I can tell right away that these are really loud, especially like the bass amp. You know, these go all the way up to the ceiling. So we're going to turn this down by about 6 or 7 dB. And if I play this back now, it did go to +3, but that's still much better than it would have been untouched. I'm going to start off with importing a track template to get these tracks organized. So I'm going to right-click on any track, go to my Insert Track from Template, and I've got my basic track folders here. So I just put those up at the top of the session. I'm going to take my kick over to my room mics. I'm going to cut them, and I'm going to paste onto the drum bus track, which will then become my folder track. There's no effects on anything. The tracks I imported were just empty, but colored a certain way, named a certain way, that sort of thing. Putting the shaker tracks into the percussion bus, putting the bass DI and the bass amp into the bass folder. I know there is no acoustic guitar, and I know there's no background vocals, so I'll just delete those tracks. And then electric guitars, there's a bunch of them, and those go into the electric guitar bus. And the keys, the Hammond goes into the keys bus, and the vocal bus gets the lead vocal. Okay, so we're up to 38 tracks. And I know that there's a lot of guitar tracks here, and they've just kind of gone crazy with microphones on these for some reason. So the first set of guitars here, just looking at the waveforms, you can tell that they're either the same performance or similar performances. Going by the file names, there's mic 1 and mic 2, and then mic 1 and mic 2. So that tells me that these are left and right guitars. And I've just panned those left and right. So those guitars sound like this. Okay, but these next set, they go from mic 1 to mic 5. So it's a bunch of different mics, but it's all one performance, which means panning's not really going to do much for us. They don't seem to be like left and right stereo rooms or anything like that. I think mic 5, that's a far room. I think mic 3, that sounded more of a close room. That's kind of a fuzz mic. Not really fond of those two. And so this one. I think that combination works pretty well. So I'm actually gonna just delete these other two. Going through this a little bit quicker because I've already spent many minutes doing this before. I'm gonna say that those are one performance. And so these ones will be panned to the right, and then these other 3 tracks will be panned to the left. I'm using the control surface to adjust faders and panning. Okay, so then there's another 6 mics for the solo. So the solo sounds like this. All right, so the first mic, kind of thin, sounds a bit distant. Pretty warm sounding. That's a closer mic. It's clearer, I think. Is that a left and right? I can't tell. I'm not a fan of like getting 6 different mics without any direction of how to use them. To be honest, I'd probably just use those 2. If I was recording this myself, or if I made this recording and I listened to all those mics, I'd probably end up with something like that, or maybe also this mic too. Because that's a bit warmer, thicker sounding. So I'm actually going to take these and just remove them from the track, or from the project. Don't need them. I'm actually going to set this to line up a little bit better. So that's beat 1, essentially, or that's a downbeat there. So I'm going to select all tracks and put a snap offset there. Turn on snap to grid, and I'm going to snap that to beat bar 5. And I'll set my start to about here. And let's listen to this whole song before I get too crazy with doing editing or anything like that. I know that's a pretty good sounding track to begin with. Not a crazy amount of like surgery to do on this. And if I didn't mention this before, I will do this with just the Reaper plugins, and I will use my own impulse responses that I've made myself, the same impulse responses that I've shared before, and you can use them as well. So here we go. Here's the full song.
Well, my father never loved me. He lived his life his own way. Well, my father never loved me. Lived his life his own way. I was raised up in the South. Raised up the hard way. my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. Even when the sun go down, worries and troubles all the next day. To work the hard way. Didn't learn no education. Had to work the hard way. My mind hadn't been strong, I could have easily lost my way.
So that doesn't sound half bad with no effects on here. Very minimal, even volume adjustment on this. I think if you left a studio with stuff that sounded like this, with just the raw tracks, you'd be pretty happy. So obviously it's lacking certain things like reverb and delays and other sorts of special effects. Everything could probably use a bit of compression. Nothing too crazy. I think this is a pretty good recording, and it should be a pretty simple mix. So I usually start a mix with the drum bus. I don't always, but usually, I would say. Often I'll actually select all the tracks and just turn them down. But that, it's just my way of working. So I'll bring up the drum bus, and I'll start building the mix from there. So I'm going to take, I don't know, this section here maybe. And starting with the overheads. There's quite a lot of hi-hat in there. Might actually just adjust that a little bit right from the start. Often I like to make my overheads kind of do, the overall sound of the kit. Depending on how they're recorded, there usually is a pretty good balance of kick, the snare, the cymbals. They're not just cymbal mics. So if I can use the EQ on the overheads to get a better sounding kick and snare sound, I will. So here's off. So there's overheads, and now I'll just bring in the snare next. then a kick. Kick sub. Then toms. I'll just pan those toms a little bit. And I'll bring in the room mic. Way too much cymbals in the room mics. If I was recording it, I definitely would have fixed that. So basically, we can only use this as sort of a lo-fi effect. So we'll come back to that. Let's hear that one more time here. Where's the toms? Pretty good sounding toms. There is a lot of bleed on these, but you'll see it really just enhances the sound of the drums, makes them sound more real. So I'm going to go to this section right here. So those tom mics actually do a better job of being rim mics than the rim mic did. But regardless, I think this is a pretty good sounding drum mix, just with panning and levels. All right, so let's bring in some effects. So I'm only using the Kakos folder of effects. So I'm gonna compress this a little bit. I'll do an exact 4:1 and bring down the threshold a bit here. Actually, I'm gonna want to not have the kick drum overpower this compressor. So I'm just setting the high pass to 60 Hertz. If we solo the kick or the snare, you can hear that it's actually been gated most likely. So there's a bit of bleed, but it's way turned down. So that's a benefit for us as long as there's no missed triggers and things like that. I didn't hear any just on the first couple listens to the song, so I think we're good with that. But that means that we don't need to add in another gate. We don't need to hard edit anything. So there's a JS plugin that I use quite a lot called the Transient Controller. So I might try that on the snare just to boost up the attack a little bit. It just adds a little bit of a pop to that snare drum. It's also quite good on kick. Onto this rim. We'll put on recomp. And we'll do 12-1. Fast attack and fast release. And fast RMS size. So I'm basically making a distortion box with that. All right, so let's get that bass guitar in here. If we have a look at this bass guitar, it's got these hard clicks. That's really difficult to remove with the built-in stock effects. We could basically just limit it to, I'm not sure what those peaks are, but you want a really fast attack. It's still kind of clicky, so let's try to make this a little bit faster by lowering the RMS size. And now it's distorting. So I'm finding that it's not really possible to get rid of those clicks too easily. That sort of popping sound is always going to be there. Yeah, that's just kind of making it a little bit too distorted for me. We'll probably have to rely more on the bass amp. I think there's a bit of a phase issue here with the two mics. So I'm actually going to zoom in here on the bass bus, and we're looking at both of these. And the bass DI reaches the computer a little bit earlier than the bass amp. That's because the bass amp signal has a lot more things going on with it. It has to go through extra circuitry for the amp, the speaker, then it's going through the air for a short distance before it hits the microphone. You can choose to either delay the bass DI, or you could move the bass amp earlier. I don't really have a preference for that. I mean, it basically comes out the same. We're only talking about 2 millisecond offset, really. Let's just look at some of these. Yeah, so that's lined up better. They weren't completely out of phase or anything, but just doing a slight nudge of one of the mics or one of the signals gets it more aligned throughout the entire song. All right, so let's go back to the drums and get our level of the bass with the kick drum. I'm going to EQ these two signals together rather than EQing the bass DI and the bass amp separately. I'll just leave it like that. Let's put on another recomp, and we'll just do 4-to-1. All right, let's find a spot that has shakers in it and bring those in. I'm just going to cut out all the lows because there's really nothing important there. Yeah, that's better. All right, I'm going to use the where is it? JS saturation plugin, just the basic one. And I'll just set this to like 45. It does affect the volume, so it's a little hard to hear how that changes things, but essentially we're just kind of adding in a little bit of saturation to both the drum bus and the bass. That shaker is not a very important part of this, at least this section of the song. You know what? As much as I love that big boomy bass, I think we're going to need a bit of re-X comp on the, not the bass bus, on the drum bus. I'm just going to do like a 2-band EQ here, and so I'll just compress everything below 90, 96. Yeah, I like that. Let's move on to the guitars. And so these first 4 guitars can move up on their all together. So with that EQ there, I'm trying to find a spot where I can still hear the bass and the guitars. Wish I could fit them both on the same screen. I've been putting these two mics in at the same amount of gain. But let's actually hear them together. So you can kind of get a different character with the two. I think I actually like that a bit better. And these other, I think it was 3 mics. Those other. So that's the warm one. And with these. And I'm just looking at the meter here to make sure that they're pretty well balanced. Okay, that's all the guitars except for the solo. Now there's that other section here where these guitars do something on their own, and I've got those panned hard left and right, or just to the left. So that might be a good indication that the solo should be panned to the opposite side. Maybe we'll just do like half, 50% to the left, and we'll turn those up one at a time. So I know I'm going to want to affect these 3 tracks together. So I'm just going to insert a new track above it and make it a folder. Got a shortcut to do that. I'll just show you that real quick. I'm using the shortcut Command-Shift-F for the script me2beats, create folder from selected tracks plus rename folder. So that is in the repack extension. All right, let's get this Hammond organ in here. Feels about right there. And get this lead vocal in here.
If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. If my mother hadn't been strong.
So first I'm going to use a limiting style compressor. So 10:1, and I'll do probably a little bit of a faster release than this, and maybe even like a 1 millisecond. And I'll bring this down.
If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day.
So just want to make sure that I'm getting like 6 dB of gain reduction. That's kind of my go-to.
If my mother hadn't been.
And so if I'm hitting minus 6 or so, I can turn up the output by 6, and it'll be a roughly the same volume, but feel more powerful.
If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day.
So that's getting rid of the loudest peaks. It's really pushing them down quite a lot and quickly. We're doing another one, and this will be not 10:1, but like 1.4. And we'll do lots of knee size, which just means that it's going to look below the threshold, and we'll get a lower amount of gain reduction for anything below the threshold. This one can be a little bit slower than that. So let's try this. Again, going for about 6, maybe 10 dB of gain reduction.
If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. In the evening when the sun go down, worries and troubles all the next day. If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day.
All right, so with it off,
If my mother hadn't been strong,
on,
if my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day.
add a bit of EQ to this.
If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day.
All right, and then we'll just put on that saturation plugin again, which I've got somewhere here. I'm going to put on the exact same setting on the vocal bus.
If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day.
Just adds a slight edge to things. Now, let's get some spatial effects on here. So we're going to do reverb 1, reverb 2, and delay. I have go-to plugins for this sort of thing, and you'll see that in my paid mixing courses. For this challenge, we're using the Reaper plugins, but I will use some of my own impulse responses. So if you're going to use reverb, the reverb plugin, REAVERB, with impulse responses, and you have this, You usually want to have this set on its own track with the wet control all the way up and the dry all the way down. Use the quick add and go to file, and then choose a impulse response. I'm using the ones that I've shared before. I think we're using 12504A. I don't remember all the details of how that worked, but 125 is the time for it. So this is a very short reverb, 125 milliseconds RT60. And we're going to turn this down by 18 dB. That's just going to make it a lot more useful. It's still probably going to be pretty loud coming out of here. I'm going to take the send from the vocal bus into reverb 1 and probably turn this down quite a bit.
If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day.
Okay, so I think I need a little bit of EQ on this.
If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day.
Kind of getting a lot at 1K.
If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day.
Okay, so that's kind of widened things up on the lead vocal. I'm going to do another reverb. I'm just going to copy over that one and choose a different impulse response, and we'll go with one of the longer ones, maybe the 250-01A. So it's just double the length, and we'll take, again, the vocal bus send over to that track.
If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day.
I'm going to mute the first reverb.
If my mother hadn't been strong.
So now we're hearing the second one. Let's go to a different effect.
If my mother hadn't been. If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. In the evening when the sun go down, worries and troubles all the next day.
So I like that. We can also use that on the Hammond. So I'm going to take from the keys bus into, let's do the big one for that, and go to a section that has Hammond. If we want to delay this a little bit, I'm going to use redelay, and we'll just make this like a pre-delay control. I'll just set this to like 12 milliseconds, see how that sounds. $25. So adding in a delay before it delays the onset of the reverb, and that can add or create separation between your source and the reverb. And let's hear that again with the vocal.
If my mother hadn't been strong.
I'll turn off the reverb or the delay.
If my mother hadn't been strong.
It just delays the sound going into the reverb, and that just creates some separation. I'm using a separate plugin for that because reverb doesn't have a pre-delay function. There's this pre-reverb function, but it's not the same as a pre-delay on another reverb. The keys are going into that reverb. I'm also going to send the guitar solo into reverb 1. Where's the guitar solo? Here it is. What I was doing there was playing around with the panning and also using the mono button on the send. So the individual mics here are panned half to the left, right? By using the mono button, made it essentially a single channel going into the reverb. I'll just show you. Looking at reverb 1 and the guitar solo, you can see that the guitar solo reverb is also coming out on the left. And if we want this to be coming out more on the right, you can pan it like this, but it's technically going to turn things down. You also set it to mono first. So we're sending that reverb a mono sum, and then we're panning it so that now it has an opposite tilt. Another thing you can do is reverse the direction of the panning, or with the width control. Essentially do the same thing, but because we're sharing this with multiple things, it's a little easier to do it on the one send that we want affected in a different way. So let's just make this like, I think 50, just to match the guitars. All right, let's also do a delay for that guitar solo. And so this is going to be a more traditional guitar delay. Let's make it stereo in this case as well. So we're going to take the pan, turn that down to -1, and we'll do 0.5 for a 16th note, and we'll bring the feedback up to like, I don't know, -12. Then click Add Tap, and then we'll take the pan, go the opposite direction. Just add a little bit of stereo spread by delaying this right side by 5 milliseconds extra. We can also mess around with the filters. So it depends on if we want this to be kind of a bright or dark sounding delay, or if we want this full range. So right now it's set at full range, giving us audio from 0 to 20,000 hertz. Let's just make this 8,000 and 500. So pretty filtered. And these are I just made up those numbers. So, you know, there's no rules, it's just whatever it sounds good. So here is the delay. I'll mute the reverb for now. There you can really hear the difference between the stereo and the mono button on the send. So with it in stereo, our delays are going to be more to the left. If we put it in mono, then it's going to process those two signals equally. And you can see here on the delay send, it's a little more even. We could keep it on stereo. We can flip this direction around. I think it sounded pretty good. That's basically it. It's going to be a pretty minimal mix because the guitars are well recorded. There's some noisy spots, but no big deal. The vocals sounded good to begin with. Everything was well recorded, so it doesn't need a lot. So yeah, I'm gonna take a break and give it a listen, and then and come back with I don't know what. All right, so I gave the song a listen, and I had some thoughts. Definitely could put some of a longer tail on the snare. It's pretty short. Easy way to do that is with some reverb. So we'll just send to that longer reverb. That one. It's not the best sounding reverb. It kind of sounds gated, actually. So I'm actually gonna just put in a new reverb, and I'll put in another delay, another reverb. And let's try a longer one. I'm gonna go with the 501A. And this one is going to receive from snare. Now I remember the A, B, and C are different fade shapes. I mean, it's really not a great sounding snare reverb, but here it is without and with. Full drum mix without snare reverb. It's still a bit loud. Bring that down to -19. I find that everything from reverb needs to be turned down a little bit. Yeah, turning it down 18 dB in the impulse doesn't it doesn't seem to be enough often. So anyways, so that is better with that. Percussion, maybe that needs a little bit of the reverb. So I'll just send that to probably, oops, not the lead vocal. I want send to the reverb one, the shorter one.
Well, my father never loved me, lived his life his own way. I was raised up in the South, raised up the hard way. have drowned that same day. If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day.
I'm going to try out a different guitar EQ for just these two guitars. I'm going to set my mono button on for the master. I'm actually going to just solo one, I think. I'm going to try that for both of these guitars and see how that sounds. It's a pretty subtle change, but I think it adds a bit of separation between those two pretty similar sounding left and right guitars. And took out some of those lows that we really didn't need. And so I'm going to do something similar on the right side, the left side. So again, monoing that, soloing just the first one. Let's try that. Let's put the two on there, solo those, out of mono. All right, so there's all the guitars together without the EQ.
Well, my father never loved me. He lived his life his own way. Well, my father never loved me. Lived his life his own way. Well, my father never loved me. He lived his life his own way.
Yeah, I think having in that really long reverb does help a bit with the lead vocal. Tempted to try it with the delay as well.
Well, my father never loved me. He lived his life his own way.
I like more. More is better in this case, in my opinion. I think with everything else kind of like pretty tight and dry, and the vocal having a lot of like texture and stuff with all these different reverbs is good.
Well, my father never loved me. Lived his life his own way. Well, my father never loved me. Lived his life his own way. I was raised up in the South. Raised up the hard way.
So on the master bus, I'm using Recomp, and I'm going to do something pretty similar to how I compressed the lead vocal with the second compressor. So just a very light ratio on here, and I'm going to take 60 hertz and below out of the detector input. There's different modes here. There's the feedback pre-fader. I don't tend to use that one, but let's try that one just for today. I have other compressors that I use more than Recomp, so I'm more comfortable with those, and I have my favorite presets, and I mix through them, and it sounds great. But this one is a little more trial and error. But I know that everyone has this one, so the main thing is just how it sounds.
Well, my father never loved me, lived his life his own way. I was raised up in the South, raised up the hard way. If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. Even when the sun go down, worries and troubles all the next day. I didn't learn no education, had to work the hard way. I didn't learn no education, had to work the hard way.
All right, so here what I've done is a pretty light compressor. It's working all the time on every note of the song. I've set the release to 350, which is on the slower side, but I've also used the auto release, so it's going to kind of adapt to the music as well. Threshold is pretty low. Feedback pre-fader detector input is what I'm using here. Kind of has a different sound than the main input. So I'll just compare those real quick.
My father never loved me, lived his life his own way. I was raised up in the South, raised up the hard way.
Not drastically different, but I think it if you just listen to the snare, it makes a difference. So anyways, this isn't like a go-to setting for me or anything like that. This is just kind of where I ended up with. Probably have different settings if you started your mix with these, with a compressor on the master rather than adding it towards the end. And one thing I almost never do is using the dry control. So when I had the dry all the way down, like I normally would with a compressor, I was hearing that it was compressed. And rather than just turning up the makeup gain, I would turn up the dry signal, so it's getting some of the uncompressed signal mixed in there. It needs a limiter as well, and I'm going to use the JS Event Horizon limiter clipper. Because it's already pretty loud, I'm going to set the threshold to 0 and ceiling at -1.5. Let's see how this goes.
Well, my father never loved me, lived his life his own way. I was raised up in the South, raised up the drown that same day. If my mother hadn't been strong, we would have drowned that same day. Even when the sun go down, worries and troubles all the next day. To work the hard way. Didn't learn no education. Had to work the hard way. My mind hadn't been strong. I could have easily lost my way.
So I'm just going through and making fine changes. You listen to things differently, or you hear things differently when you have limiting or compression on the master. Everything kind of sits a little bit differently. So I'm just kind of doing small changes. Like in that last verse, I was finding that the vocals sound a little bit thin. And so just backing off that low cut a little bit on him, and the snare wasn't quite cutting through, so I added in the soft clipper limiter, just a hair of that. But also I wanted everyone to kind of like hear how the song was going as a whole, not soloing things. All right, so as a static mix, I think that is pretty good. That's a very good spot to stop. That's the point when you would print the mix and see what the client thinks, see what the band thinks. No, I think I've said this before in a video. You don't have to use parallel compression on every mix. You don't have to use drum samples on every mix. You don't have to reamp everything, and you don't have to use Melodyne and all those things. Sometimes you just do what the tracks need, and that could just be EQ and compression. That could be adding in some reverb. That could be throwing everything you have, doing sound design, all that kind of stuff, just to get the right sound. In today's case, it doesn't need much. It started in a really good spot, so it didn't take much to get it to the level where I'm happy with it. It doesn't sound dissimilar to how it started. I don't like when a mix drastically changes the sound of the raw tracks, especially when they sound good to begin with. And that's where I'm going to leave it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you've learned something. This was a lot of fun. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter, support the Reaper blog through Patreon, and visit reaperblog.net for a lot more tutorials.